Salutations, gentle viewers. This video is about the October Revolution in 1917. So my previous videos, I talked about the run-up to it. So September, late August, early September 1917, there was this very confused incident called the Kornilov coup, or maybe I should accentuate it, Kornilov. Anyhow, it's very difficult to work out what actually happened and why, because there's claim and counterclaim. But one of the facts that all accounts agree on, and that is that Pyotr Kornilov, a general at the front, took his troops back to Petrograd and attempted to seize power. He seemed to want to set up a conservative authoritarian regime. Did he want to bring the Tsar back or not? Establish himself as a military dictator? That's unclear. Did he think that Kerensky had ordered him back? Or did he think that Kerensky had been kidnapped by the Bolsheviks and was sending him false orders? That's what's in dispute. But anyway, he failed to seize power. But the provisional government had very few troops loyal to them in Petrograd, so they were forced to rearm the Red Guards, and the Red Guards saved the provisional government. So Kornilov was defeated, and he went off elsewhere. He was killed in the Civil War next year by a Red Army artillery strike. That's by the by. So the Red Guards were back, and they had their weapons. They'd been briefly banned, and the Bolsheviks, after the June 1917, their failed attempt to seize power. So, October 1917, the situation had deteriorated still further for the provisional government. The Russian army was being pushed back and back by the Central Powers. Desertions had made the military situation untenable. The paucity of food and firewood had made life unbearable in many cities, so it had come to point break. The provisional government was deeply unpopular. Tsarists were even plotting a comeback. The Bolsheviks had decided the moment was to strike. The moment had come. This was their opportunity. So there were soldiers and sailors, including serving at the front, who were in the Bolshevik party. The Bolsheviks formed a secret military revolutionary committee to plan their revolution, and they took a vote. Should they attempt to seize power or not? One of those who voted against was Stalin, or Joseph Djugashvili, to give him his real name, a Georgian member of the Bolsheviks. There were various reasons why the Bolsheviks shouldn't do it. First of all, they thought they wouldn't succeed, and they failed just a few months before. Second of all, even if they did seize power, what kind of a situation was it to take over? It was a poisoned chalice. The war situation was hopeless. On the other hand, if they made peace with Germany, they'd have to give away huge amounts of land, pay reparations, agree to all sorts of terrible terms, and then they would be blamed for having brought about the defeat. But Lenin said, no, this is a golden opportunity. This will not come again. We're going ahead now. So it was his iron will brought it about. So Stalin later covered that up, that he actually voted against the October Revolution. But once a decision had been made, Stalin went along with it. There was a battleship Aurora under Bolshevik control. In the dead of night, it fired a shell at the Winter Palace in Petrograd. That was a signal that the revolution was going ahead. So Bolsheviks troops stormed the Winter Palace. In fact, it was very lightly held. There were some cadets and some female soldiers. The provisional government had taken the extraordinary step of having women as soldiers, not auxiliaries at the front fighting, the Women's Death Battalion who shaved their heads. They thought that would shame Russian manhood into volunteering. Anyway, not a single person was killed in storming the Winter Palace. The Bolsheviks seized several of the key installations around Petrograd, and some people were killed in skirmishes there. The telephone exchange, banks, railway stations, ammunition dumps, and so on. They encountered little resistance because the government had very few troops to spare. Those they had were mostly at the front. So the death toll was in the dozens. I mean, for a city of 2 million people, that was not high. So Kerensky fled in a vehicle provided by the US Embassy. Some other government ministers were arrested. The Bolsheviks set up their HQ in the Smolny Institute, formerly a girls' finishing school. So that was the October Revolution. According to the New Style calendar, one we used, Gregorian calendar, it was 5th of November when it began. But according to Russia, Old Style calendar, it was in October. They used the Julian calendar. It's only 1918 that they used the same calendar as the rest of the world and jumped forward 12 days. So despite it being in November by our calendar, it's always known as the October Revolution. So the Bolsheviks then had to seize control of Moscow, and there was heavy fighting there. It took weeks for them to win control of Russia's second city, as it was then. They seized control of several other major cities. So the Bolsheviks wanted Russia to be a socialist state. They did not outlaw other political parties at that time. There were elections scheduled for the end of November 1918, and they went ahead as planned, which is extraordinary, bearing in mind there was this mortal struggle against Germany going on, but the army at the front, its will to fight, petered out at that point. The Central Powers did not press their advantage. They thought, no, we'll just leave them, because if we attack, then the Bolsheviks and the other Russian groups might get together and defend. We will not move forward, and we will let the Russians tear each other apart. Despite being disrupted a bit by the war situation, the elections went ahead. The Bolsheviks got 25% of the vote. The Social Revolutionaries got 40% of the vote. Crucially, the Social Revolutionaries were identified with by the peasantry. The Social Revolutionaries said we must have land reform. They didn't necessarily believe in public ownership, but peasant proprietorship. The ordinary farmer and farming family should own the land that they work on. They should not have to pay rent to some landlord who doesn't do the physical labour. So the Duma, that's the parliament, met in Petrograd. The Bolsheviks closed it down after one day. It wasn't to their liking because they didn't win. The other political parties were Mensheviks, who were the other section of the RSDLP, Octoberists, who were conservative, Constitutional Democrats, who were liberal, we can say, few religious fundamentalist parties, nationalist parties from the non-Russian parts of the empire, and even a tiny faction of Tsarist reactionaries. So the Bolsheviks established a Soviet of People's Commissars. That would be a cabinet in common parlance. But they said, we're not a bourgeois government, we're a proletarian government, we're for the working class. We're not going to use bourgeois terminology like cabinet minister, we'll say People's Commissar. So People's Commissar for health, People's Commissar for education, People's Commissar for war, People's Commissar for foreign affairs, and so on. So there was a chairman of the Soviet of People's Commissars. It's equivalent of prime minister in most countries, and Lenin was that chairman. Lenin said that he wanted the non-Russian areas of the Russian Empire to remain united, like Azerbaijan, Latvia, Lithuania, Uzbekistan. I could name them all. But if they wanted independence, then their wish for independence would be granted. He said he would like to see a voluntary and honourable union. Anyway, so they all did declare independence. Some of them very briefly experienced independence. Armenia, Georgia, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, so on. The eastern section of Poland joined the western section of Poland. Finland became independent. Russia was to regain almost all this land within the next 23 years. The October Revolution was a very significant moment. As Marxists would say, it was a world historical event, because Karl Marx, who published the Communist Manifesto, had laid out his blueprint for a communist society, had to go through a socialist stage and then to a communist stage, which he felt was the ideal civilization. And Russia was the first country to attempt to put into practice his theories, although Marx is often vague about how exactly this would work. So it was the world's first communist government. The Bolsheviks, they soon renamed themselves communists. So in the Soviet Union, this was to be called the Great Socialist October Revolution. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics was not founded until December 1922. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, but it's sometimes called the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union often traced itself to 1917, although it wasn't actually founded until 1922.